Good evening, gentlemen. I'm going to talk today on the situation in Southeast Asia. As you know, Southeast Asia is a very vital and important area of Asia, but it is a hotbed of intrigue and violence. That is prospective violence, and that is something which I will explain to you now. The first thing we must remember is that the biggest power in this region is People's Republic of China. It's a massive country with a population of 1.4 billion. And for long periods, it was like a slumbering giant, like just sleeping, a sleeping giant. And for the last, I think, from 1835 onwards, it has been a subject of ridicule by the various powers. At the same time, it was a power which was totally dominated by the external powers. It started actually with 1842 when the first Opium War took place, and then came 1856, the second Opium War, which was fought with the British and the Chinese are defeated. And then there was the Chinese rebellion known as the Boxer Rebellion in 1900, which was crushed. And in 1895, I think there was a Chinese war with Japan, and the Chinese are defeated, and the island of Formosa was ceded to Japan for 50 years. It remained under the control of the Japanese. But after the arrival of communism in 1949, Mao Zedong decided that the time had come when the humiliations of the past must be set aside and China must have its place in the sun. Well, I have nothing against it. I think every nation has a renaissance, and it's a good thing the Chinese had it. But there's one point: you can have a renaissance, but you cannot have it at the expense of the other nations. And historical borders which have lasted cannot be just changed overnight. You see now, for example, Formosa is an almost independent state, known as the state of Taiwan, and it follows the democratic system, but China claims it's that part of China. And to make compound matters, the Americans, when they threw in the towel in 1972, in that famous and historical visit by President Nixon to Beijing, agreed on the one China principle. That is, there would be only one China, and that is, it would be mainland China. In that way, they gave carte blanche to Beijing to take action against Formosa and stop its independence. Well, now the Americans realized that it was something which was not that easy to do for the Chinese, because they decided to have second thoughts. They wanted to build up a bulwark against China, so they began to support the Taiwanese, and a lot of weapons have been given to them, a lot of aid, and Taiwan is now one of the prosperous states of the world. But the Chinese are now resurgent. One thing we must give credit to the Chinese is that they achieved what America and other countries achieved in 100 years, they achieved it in 10 years. Now, I'll not go into the details. That calls for a separate video how they did it. But the fact remains that the Chinese economy is now the second biggest in the world at 18 trillion. And I think they have the biggest armed forces in the world. Maybe not the most efficient, but definitely in size is the biggest. Their Achilles heel is the Navy, because China doesn't have much of an outlet into the sea other than onto the South China Sea, and here they are very belligerent, because being the dominating power, they're claiming the almost 90% of the South China Sea as their fiefdom, as their area of influence. Now, there are certain littoral states around that South China Sea, starting with Vietnam is there, then the Philippines, Borneo, Indonesia, Singapore. All these countries want to have a pie of these rich resources which are supposed to be there in the South China Sea. But China has got a head start. And how did they have that head start? The head start, I think, started from time of Clinton. Because something is there which I think the Americans must investigate. And I'll just quote President Duterte, who was the president of Philippines, and he said, America was never serious about controlling China in the South China Sea. If they were serious, they would have sent 5 aircraft carriers there and stopped the Chinese attempt to occupy the entire South China Sea in a jiffy. They didn't do that. Why? Basically, they thought that they'll have a partnership with China. Even Joe Biden, when he took over as president, the first words he said that China is not an enemy, it is a rival, a competitor. Now, that's not the way you look at an enemy, maybe because there were extraneous sources supporting his son, Hunter Biden. I got no proof about it, but that's what they say, and he's been pilloried from post to post that he was drawing money from the Chinese. Maybe, maybe not. But the fact remains, the old saying, even Caesar's wife must be above suspicion, that applies to Joe Biden. And luckily, he's out of the scene now and going to go and sit at home. And I think he was one of the worst presidents America could have had. Well, China was facilitated by America thinking that they would be a counterpoise against, it would be a counterpoise against Russia, and it would be their second partner in the world. Chinese goods would be sold in.
Obviously, they also thought they would be getting a very big market for their goods in China. I mean, what a big market they would have got. That's what they're thinking. It's going to be wonderful. And then they poured in crores and crores, or rather billions and billions of dollars of technology into China. Now, what is the reason behind? I couldn't make out. But probably the aim was, well, keep China on our side, make Russia the enemy, finish Russia forever. And so the Americans thinking they have a partnership with China, and the Chinese are very clever. They don't take the Americans easily. And they took them easily rather. And they began to have their own activities. What they did, they started something called reverse engineering. So whatever goods the Americans were supplying, whether it was a laptop or the aeroplane, they did reverse engineering and produced products of their own, labeled it as made in China. And so the Americans were left startled, stunned. Hey, what the hell's happened? How did China cover one full generation, 10 years? And this is the clue to the rise of China, that they copied the Western technology which was given to them gratis, improved on it, and made it their own, and are now dominating the world. You can't help it. It's part of the game. Well, gentlemen, this is the precise position which has happened. And right from the time when Lyndon Johnson allowed the Chinese to go ahead and have their bombs, I mean, I couldn't understand the reason behind it. What the hell was he thinking of? Yeah. The American, I believe, B-52s at one stage were ready for the bombing, but he put a stop to it. Maybe it was pressure from the military, economic, social lobby, which wanted that China should be on their side. But now the clock has turned a full 24 hours and the old situation is gone. China is now resurgent, absolutely resurgent, and one can see the amount of progress they have made in the recent air show which they held at Shanghai, where they showcased the fifth generation fighter, the J-35. Now, if you have a look at the fighter, it's almost similar to the F-35, and maybe Its performance-wise, it may be a little inferior, or maybe I don't know, because nobody tested the plane. But the fact remains that they have the fifth generation fighter, and the Americans must be wondering what's going on. Things are changing now. I think Biden, as you know, is on his way out, and he has a lot to answer for during his tenure. And his son, Hunter Biden, his name was popping up every time. I think he's got some conviction also, and maybe good old Joe may pardon him using his presidential power. And then from 20 January, we'll have Donald Trump in charge. But that will be easy for Donald to deal with China, because China is a very resurgent economy, and as per the Pew Research and the various reports which have been put in by the World Bank, in another 10 years, China is going to overtake the United States as the biggest economy in the world. If that happens, I think there's cause for worry, not only for the United States, but even for countries like America and the peripheral states of the South Pacific, that is the South China Sea. Now, gentlemen, the South China Sea is the real hotbed of problems. China, as I've been told you, has built up its economy, building up its war machine. I think what they're lacking is a bit of a navy, because navy is their Achilles heel. And the Americans' Achilles heel is the infantry soldier. They don't have the soldier. How the hell are they going to mount an invasion of China? Because let's accept one fact, there's going to be no nuclear war, but that would mean the destruction of both China and the United States. Was likely to be a conventional war, and in that conventional war, the Chinese will be having the better of the Americans. In fact, some war studies which have been carried out clearly show that the American carriers will not be able to carry the day. Now, America doesn't have defense in depth. That is the point which I'm making out. They have some bases in Japan and South Korea, Okinawa, Philippines. But these bases are for the operational aircraft. And some American troops are maintained. Maybe I think 50,000 troops are there in South Korea. But how are they going to help, when the Chinese got 30 divisions lined up? And as Field Marshal Montgomery said, it is the infantry soldier which must hold the ground. You need the infantry soldier, and that is where the Americans are going to lose out. They don't have the infantry soldiers, and that's why they want to look to India. If India can balance the Americans, and then, of course, if India is on the side of the Americans, China will lose. But I think Narendra Modi is a very shrewd man, and he will not fight the American war against China. But it's a Hobson's choice, because China, in any case, can be trusted. I repeat, can't be trusted. And today, they are friends with India, want to have a détente, but tomorrow they could turn easily and start biting. Left, right, and center. You don't know what they're going to do. So the Chinese can be trusted. At the same time, India cannot join the battle against China. As far as the Americans are concerned, I think the aircraft carriers are very, very vulnerable to multiple missile hits by hypersonic missiles. What's going to happen then? It's going to be a terrible situation all the time. And the Americans will be at their wit's end. If the carriers are sunk, there's no second line of defense, no defense in depth, and they can't have an offensive strike, and that will be the end of the war. Now, this is a very alarming scenario which I have painted, but that's very likely to happen. It could happen. And the only way it need not happen is if America builds up a tremendous superiority over China, which is not possible. Because economically also, China has got a trade of $600 billion with America and $400 billion deficit. That is, America is getting goods worth $400 billion from China into America. And America is able to sell only $200 billion to China. So it's a very terrible situation, and we'll have to wait and see what happens now. The Chinese are cock-a-hoop, but at the same time, as I told you, they are having economic problems. Now, that is a crucial point which the world must keep in mind. The Chinese got tremendous economic problems. Some of the real estate barons have collapsed, and They have even taken action against uh, businessmen and entrepreneurs like the owner Alibaba. I don't know whether he's in jail or he's out, because they tried to put communism in front, in place of business. At the same time, the Chinese are very resilient, but I wonder how they're going to get out of the economic problem. And they need America to get out. And you can't get out by just fighting with America. So, gentlemen, we'll have to wait and see again. But as I told you, the war in the Eastern Pacific is something that's bound to happen until and unless the Americans hand over Formosa to China or give carte blanche to China for the South China Sea. That's a very crucial question. Is America going to do it? America has done so many things like that. They abandoned their allies in Vietnam. They abandoned their allies in Afghanistan, just ran away. And once they do that, you can expect they could do the same thing here. Why not? They could have a design with China and say, okay, well, you can take over Taiwan. Good enough. Please go ahead and occupy Taiwan. So that, gentlemen, is the problem. Japan, of course, they would leave in no time. The Japanese are a liability these days. The economy is nowhere. They're nowhere in the top of the world. And South Korea also would be left to fend for itself. Maybe they'll bargain for the Philippines, and Vietnam and the Chinese may make an adjustment there. But that's just part of thinking. As it stands, the American presidents have made it very clear that they're not going to allow China the upper hand in the South Pacific. That is the South China Sea. They're not going to allow it. That's what they say. But you can't put the clock back. What Clinton and party did when they were in power and allowed the Chinese to run riot in the South China Sea. Now they have a destroyer running here and there, trying to talk of freedom of navigation. Has got no relevance really. One destroyer running here and there, the Chinese are in big force there. So, gentlemen, I hope you like this video. Please share it with your friends and come back for more. In the meanwhile, I'll say goodbye and Jai Hind.